morning, everyone, and welcome to Ohio EPA's Decoding RCRA, Navigating the Basics of Hazardous Waste presentation. My name is Helen Miller with the Division of Environmental and Financial Assistance here at Ohio EPA, and I will be moderating this morning's presentation with Ohio EPA's Bill Narodsky with the Division of Environmental Response and Revitalization. We also have Ohio EPA's Tammy Heffelfinger and Christy Shipley from DUR behind the scenes helping to answer submitted questions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ohio EPA's Bill Narodsky.
Thank you, Helen. Good morning, everyone. I am Bill Narodsky with the Ohio EPA's Hazardous Waste Compliance Assurance Section. I'm providing an overview of the hazardous waste requirements today. The downloadable presentation PDF has active links to our web pages. They are in blue font and underlined, which making the notes a useful toolkit for you. And we recently updated our web pages, so the links may be really helpful. The Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA, is what regulates hazardous waste from the moment it's generated at a place of business until its final disposal, which is why we refer to it as cradle-to-grave management. Specifically, RCRA, Subtitle C, is what regulates hazardous waste. There are rules for generators, what most businesses probably are, transporters, and permitted treatment, storage, and disposal facilities. For this presentation, we are focusing on generator requirements. In order to understand if you are subject to RCRA, you really have to know if you are generating hazardous waste. And for a material to be a hazardous waste, it must first meet the definition of a waste. A waste is a material that will be discarded either by disposal, by burning, by storing, or by treating that material in lieu of discarding it. A waste is also any material that will be recycled either by using on or applying to the ground, or burning it for energy recovery, or if it's speculatively accumulated for the intent to recycle. Speculative accumulation is demonstrated when a recycler does not recycle at least 75% of the material in a calendar year. Certain things are not considered wastes. If they are specifically excluded by rule, which I will go over here in a moment, or when certain materials will be reused or reclaimed, they are not considered wastes. But keep in mind, many materials, including spent materials or listed byproducts, are wastes, even when they're reclaimed. As I mentioned before, if a material is put on the land, burned, or speculatively accumulated, it is considered a waste. Ohio's waste laws specify that a generator is any person by site whose act or process produces a hazardous waste or causes a waste to be subject to the hazardous waste rules. And again, in order for a material to be a hazardous waste, it must first meet the definition of a waste. And if you generate a waste, you must determine if your waste is a hazardous waste. Ohio Administrative Code, or OAC, Rule 3745-5211 provides you with the step-by-step procedures to follow when making this determination. Failure to properly evaluate your waste may lead to unsafe management, treatment, or disposal of hazardous waste. So proper waste evaluation is very important. A waste determination needs to be made at the point of generation, prior to any dilution, mixing, or alteration, because those activities could change the properties of the waste. Anytime the properties have changed, a new determination needs to be made. So don't throw any waste into the dumpster until you've determined that the waste is not hazardous. Some options that are available to make waste determinations include the hazardous waste rules. Links to the rules are on the downloadable presentation notes. You can collect a representative sample of your waste and submit it for analysis at a lab. or you can use your knowledge as a generator. The rule doesn't specify what sources you can use as generator knowledge, nor does US EPA have any formal guidance. But some of the things you can consider are your process inputs, the raw materials you are using, information provided by your supplier, and you can also reference safety data sheets. However, you should be careful when using safety data sheets, and they should never be used as the sole determination. But used more as a supportive document because they don't always list all hazardous constituent levels, and some things may be a trade secret. The basic questions you need to ask when making a waste determination are: is this waste excluded? Does it belong to a specific waste list? And I'll get to the FKP and U list in a moment. And does the waste exhibit a hazardous characteristic? The first thing you want to do is look at OAC Rule 3745-5104. This rule lists and describes the specific wastes that are excluded from hazardous waste regulation, as well as any conditions they need to meet. There are about 34 pages of exclusions, and some common examples are provided on the slide. You then should also look at OAC Rule 3745-5106, which defines additional exclusions and requirements for recyclable materials, including used oil and contaminated wipes and apparel, also referred to as hazardous textiles, that will be laundered and returned to use. If your waste does not meet an exclusion, you want to take a look at the 4 hazardous waste lists. The first one we are going to talk about is the F list. These hazardous wastes come from non-specific sources, which just means that they can be generated from a wide range of manufacturing processes. Some common examples are spent solvents, such as trichloroethylene, xylene, and toluene, as well as electroplating wastes, such as wastewater treatment sludges and plating bath solutions or residues. Here is a snapshot of part of the F list table. You can see the waste number is in the left-hand column, and in the middle there is a description of the waste that falls into that category. And the right-hand column has a hazard code, which indicates the reason for listing the waste. There are several hazard codes that you may see listed, including T for toxic waste, H for acute hazardous waste, I for ignitable waste, C for corrosive waste, R for reactive waste, and E for toxicity characteristic waste. The next list is the K list, which is industry specific. Some examples include spent pot liners from primary aluminum reduction, as well as emission control dusts or sludge from steel production. This table shows some of the K listed wastes. As you can see in the hazardous waste description column, they are very source and industry specific. And once again, the right column is letting you know why that waste belongs to this list. And in the case of the ones provided on this list, they are all coded T, indicating toxic waste. The final 2 lists are the P and U lists, which contain unused, discarded commercial chemical products. The key word here is they are unused. So if a waste was generated after going through a manufacturing process, it's not going to meet that requirement. The only difference between the P and U lists is the P list identifies acute hazardous wastes, which are more dangerous in smaller quantities. Now we are going to talk about the final step in making a hazardous waste determination. A waste can be hazardous if it exhibits a characteristic by being ignitable, corrosive, reactive, or toxic. Ignitable wastes are assigned the D001 waste code. These are liquids with a flash point of less than 140 degrees, which include solvents and degreasers, solids that spontaneously ignite, such as some metal swarfs, and ignitable compressed gases and oxidizers. Corrosive hazardous wastes carry the D002 waste code. These are acids and bases. Aqueous solutions with a pH of less than or equal to 2, or greater than or equal to 12.5. These are liquids that corrode steel at a specified rate. So, you really want to know if your waste is corrosive because it's going to determine what type of container you can use to store it. Some examples include sodium hydroxide and waste hydrochloric acid. Reactive hazardous wastes will carry the D003 waste code, and they are extremely unstable. These wastes can explode or react violently with water. An example is ammonium nitrate. The fourth category of characteristic hazardous waste is for toxicity. While the previous three categories have the potential to cause more of an immediate harm, wastes that are characteristically toxic also have the potential to cause long-term harm by contaminating our groundwater. The waste code range is from D004 to D043. To determine if your waste is toxic, take a representative sample of the waste and send it to a lab for toxicity characteristic leaching procedure, or T-CLIP analysis. The lab will simulate landfill conditions to determine the amount of chemicals that will leach into the groundwater. If the waste contains toxic constituents equal to 2 or greater than the regulatory levels, you have a waste characteristic of toxicity. There are 32 organics in this category, as well as 8 RCRA metals. This table shows the waste codes on the left and the regulatory levels in milligrams per liter on the right. Once you get your lab results back, you can compare the results to this table to determine if you have a hazardous waste. So let's take a moment to recap the waste determination process. First, is it excluded? If it is, then you don't have a hazardous waste. If not, you need to move on to examining the 4 hazardous waste lists. As you can see by this chart, even if you determine that you have a listed hazardous waste, you cannot stop there. You still must determine if the waste also exhibits a characteristic. If the waste is not listed or characteristic, you're done. Just keep the determination on file. Once you've determined you have a hazardous waste, you have to know the size of generator you are, because that's going to determine what type of requirements you need to follow. For Ohio and most states, there are 3 different generator categories that are based on how much you generate in 1 calendar month, as well as how much you store on site. So let's get to our first poll question and see what size generators we have with us today. Thanks, Helen. Looks like we have a pretty good mix, and there's quite a few consultants and TAPs or students on. So hopefully the presentation will be good information for you and a useful toolkit for you this year. Thanks. When determining your generator category, you must count the total weight of all hazardous waste generated at a facility in a calendar month. Very small quantity generators and small quantity generators are also limited in how much hazardous waste they can store on site, so you will want to pay attention to those numbers as well. When a generator is determining their generator category, they must consider 3 relevant types of hazardous waste. Hazardous waste or non-acute hazardous waste for purposes of this discussion, acute hazardous waste, and residues from the cleanup of a spill of acute hazardous waste. In three of the scenarios here on the slide, the generator is a large quantity generator. In one scenario, the generator is a small quantity generator, and in one, a very small quantity generator. When calculating generator categories, the quantities of acute hazardous waste and non-acute hazardous waste are considered separately. You will want to pay attention to the limit for acute hazardous waste because it only takes 1 kilogram, or 2.2 pounds of acute hazardous waste to make you a large quantity generator. Very small quantity generators generate up to 220 pounds of hazardous waste in a month, which is roughly half of a 55-gallon drum, and never store more than 2,200 pounds of hazardous waste on site, which is roughly 5 55-gallon drums. That, of course, is going to vary based on the density of your waste streams. The next category is small quantity generators. You will fall into this category if you generate more than 220 pounds, but less than 2,200 pounds of hazardous waste in a calendar month. You are also limited to the amount of hazardous waste stored on site at any given time to 13,200 pounds. Large quantity generators generate 2,200 pounds or more of hazardous waste per month and have no limit for generator status on the amount of hazardous waste stored on site. Now we are going to get into the specific requirements that generators need to follow. I would like to re-emphasize that RCRA Subtitle C was established to regulate the management of hazardous waste, which includes permitting. And when we talk about all the specific requirements for the generator categories, these are conditions that must be followed in order to be exempt from permitting requirements, which are much more burdensome. If you generate, treat, store, or dispose of hazardous waste, or store recyclable materials prior to recycling them, you may be required to notify Ohio EPA of your hazardous waste activity and obtain a US EPA identification number. You obtain this number by registering online through MyRCRA ID and RCRA Info, or by submitting Form 9029 to Ohio EPA. If you are a very small quantity generator, you are not required to obtain an ID number, but small quantity generators and large quantity generators need ID numbers. Keep in mind, ID numbers are site-specific, so you will need to complete a form for each individual site that is required to obtain a number. If your company moves to another location and will still be required to have an ID number, you must notify Ohio EPA of your new location and submit a new form. This is because ID numbers are tied to a physical address. We also request that you submit a letter to deactivate the number at the old site. It will be reassigned to future occupants if they generate hazardous waste. There is also a re-notification requirement. Small quantity generators need to re-notify every 4 years, submitting Form 9029 by September 1st, again, every 4 years. Large quantity generators need to re-notify March 1st of even years, which is the same time biennial reports are due. So it can just be done as part of that report. Since the deadline has just passed, I hope all the large quantity generators have re-notified. And if you haven't, please complete the re-notification as soon as you can. Small quantity generators and large quantity generators are both subject to container and tank management requirements. This includes labeling them. Examples of how to indicate the hazards include, but are not limited to, writing the hazardous waste characteristics on the container, such as ignitable, corrosive, reactive, or toxic, or using a hazard communication consistent with the Department of Transportation requirements, outlined in 49 CFR Part 172, Subpart E for labeling and Subpart F for placarding, or a hazard statement or pictogram consistent with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration Hazard Communication Standard, or a chemical hazard label consistent with the National Fire Protection Association Code 704. Hopefully, you are already complying with one or more of these type of labels. The key to properly identifying whether you have a tank or a container depends on the mobility of the unit, portable or stationary, and how the unit is used at your facility. If you do not use it to move the hazardous waste, it is most likely a tank. And if the unit is used to collect the material in one location and is then moved to another location, it's a container. There are additional requirements for containers. Lids need to be kept closed except when adding or removing waste or venting if necessary. And containers need to be inspected weekly. If you are a large quantity generator, you also need to make sure your ignitable or reactive hazardous waste is stored at least 50 feet from the property line, unless you have a waiver from the fire department. And you must also comply with the federal air emission standards. Here's an example of good container management. You can see the drums are labeled and closed. There appears to be DOT labels on them indicating the contents are flammable, and there are no signs of dents or leaks. Now we are going to move into additional requirements for tanks. There are many requirements for large quantity generators who store hazardous waste in tanks, so the linked guidance document provides a lot of good information on that subject. For small quantity generators, you may accumulate hazardous waste in tanks for up to 180 days. Or if you're transporting a distance of 200 miles or more, you can store the waste for up to 270 days without a permit, as long as you never accumulate more than 13,200 pounds on site at any time. On a daily basis, you need to inspect discharge control equipment, such as waste feed cutoff systems, bypass systems, and drainage systems. Inspect data gathered from monitoring equipment, such as pressure and temperature gauges, and inspect the level of waste in an uncovered tank to ensure compliance with the tank freeboard requirements. On a weekly basis, you need to inspect tanks to detect corrosion or leaking of fixtures or seams, and inspect the area immediately surrounding discharge confinement structures, such as dikes or secondary containment, for obvious signs of leakage. And upon closure of the facility, hazardous waste must be removed from the tank, as well as from discharge control equipment and from discharge confinement structures. Since the regulations for large quantity generators storing hazardous waste in tanks are lengthy, I've listed just a brief summary of the requirements on the slides. There need to be inventory logs or monitoring equipment to demonstrate tanks are turned over in the 90-day time frame. The tanks need to be inspected daily to identify leaks, deterioration, corrosion, or structural fatigue in any portion of the tank or system components. They also need to be equipped with secondary containment and leak detection systems to allow for detection of leaks from the primary or inner tank while providing a secondary barrier to contain releases and prevent them from entering the environment, and also provide protection from spills caused by operational errors, such as overfilling. Appropriate spill control equipment should be on site and maintained correctly. The tanks need to be certified by a professional engineer. Upon closure of the facility, hazardous waste must be removed from the tank, as well as from the discharge control equipment and from the discharge confinement structures. And generators need to comply with all applicable federal hazardous waste air emission standards for tanks. Moving on to satellite accumulation. Satellite accumulation refers to a storage location where your hazardous waste initially accumulates. This rule only applies to small quantity generators and large quantity generators. Each satellite accumulation area can only have up to 55 gallons of hazardous waste per area, or 1 quart of acute hazardous waste. The container needs to be located at or near the point of generation and under the control of the operator of the process that is generating that waste. This will hopefully prevent the addition of incompatible waste into the satellite container and prevent untrained personnel from coming into contact with the waste. The containers used to store waste need to be compatible with the contents. For example, you wouldn't want to store sulfuric acid in an unlined steel drum. That could cause it to corrode. And the containers need to be in good condition, so there should be no dents, bulges, or leaks. Marking and labeling requirements do apply to satellite containers, so they need to be labeled as hazardous waste and have an indication of the hazards of the contents. The satellite containers need to be kept closed except when actively adding or removing hazardous waste, unless it is necessary to temporarily vent the container. Once the satellite container is full, you need to date it and move it to the central accumulation area within 3 calendar days. All right, it's time for our second poll question. Can you spot the violations that an inspector could cite for this satellite accumulation area, where one barrel has been full for over a week? Okay, thanks, Helen. The actual correct answer is all of them. The bucket is open and it needs to be closed if the operator is not adding materials to it. Everything should have a label on it, and if the barrel is full and at 55 gallons, it needs to be moved to the central accumulation area in 3 days of reaching the 55 gallons. So with that detail in this example, there are too many containers. So now that you have moved your waste to your central accumulation area, if you are a small quantity generator or a large quantity generator, you are limited in the number of days you can store it. Very small quantity generators don't have any storage time limits, but keep in mind, if you accumulate more than 2,200 pounds of hazardous waste on site at any one time, you become subject to the small quantity generator requirements until it's shipped off. For small quantity generators, if you accumulate waste for longer than 180 days, or 270 days if transporting more than 200 miles, you must get a hazardous waste permit. For large quantity generators, hazardous waste may not be accumulated at the central accumulation area for more than 90 days. Large quantity generators must maintain strict compliance with the 90-day time frame, since exceeding the allowable accumulation period can cause a generator to potentially be classified as an operator of an illegal hazardous waste storage facility. If you encounter unforeseen, temporary, and uncontrollable circumstances getting hazardous waste transported off-site before the deadlines, it's possible to obtain a temporary extension of 30 days to the accumulation provisions from the Director of the Ohio EPA. Contact Ohio EPA to request an extension prior to the 90, 180, or 270-day requirement. Generators may want to treat their hazardous waste on-site for a variety of reasons, including to render it less hazardous, make it easier to recover, store, or transport, or even reduce the volume. It's important to understand what is permissible for you to do as a generator. I've linked a guidance document with a lot more information if this is something you're considering at your facility. But in general, There are a few types of treatment that are allowed. You can perform neutralization, polymerization, stabilization, and wastewater treatment. Treatment must be done in tanks, containers, on drip pads, or in containment buildings. And you are not allowed to conduct any thermal treatment or land disposal without a permit. Also keep in mind that the 90 or 180-day storage time limit still applies while you are treating your hazardous waste. It is always a good idea to reach out to us if you have any questions before you treat your hazardous waste. Once waste has reached the accumulation limit, it's time to ship it off-site. And there are some specific shipping requirements that need to be followed. Very small quantity generators aren't required to prepare a manifest unless that waste was generated from an episodic event. However, if you're shipping 2,200 pounds or more hazardous waste, you would then be a small quantity generator. Small quantity generators and large quantity generators must prepare a manifest before shipping hazardous waste off-site. Transporting hazardous waste off-site also has U.S. Department of Transportation requirements. The hazardous waste being transported needs to be packaged correctly, as required by U.S. Department of Transportation Regulations 49 CFR Parts 173, 178, and 179. The material needs to be labeled and marked as defined in 49 Part 172. And before you have the hazardous waste transported off-site, you must placard or offer the initial transporter the correct placards for the material. If you have any specific questions regarding DOT shipping requirements, you can contact the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. They oversee these regulations in Ohio. Manifests are multiple copy tracking documents that accompany hazardous waste shipments. The manifest acts as a chain of custody for the waste from the point it leaves your business until it reaches its final destination. Each person who generates, transports, stores, treats, or disposes of waste must sign and retain a copy of the manifest. This provides a traceable link between your business and the designated facility. Once the hazardous waste reaches its final destination, the person receiving your waste returns a signed copy of the manifest to you. Be sure to provide enough copies of your manifest so that each transporter has a copy for the records. The designated facility must have 2 copies, one for their records and one that is returned to you. In 2018, US EPA launched the eManifest system, which is a national electronic system to track hazardous waste shipments. Many of you may already be using eManifest instead of paper copies at this point. If you aren't, and you are looking for more information on eManifests, check out our website. We have a lot of information, including a video and instructions on how to sign up for the service. Our next topic is LDRs. US EPA intended that land disposal restrictions would ensure that the toxic constituents present in hazardous waste are properly treated before the waste is land disposed. Hazardous wastes, or some component of them, are often placed into permitted hazardous waste landfills. The disposal of this waste in a landfill has the potential, over a long period of time, to threaten human health and environment by leaking hazardous constituents into the groundwater, even though the landfill has a liner and other safeguards. As a result, most hazardous waste must be treated to meet specific treatment standards prior to disposal in a permitted hazardous waste landfill. Now, we're moving into the requirements for emergency preparedness. There are no prescribed emergency preparedness requirements for very small quantity generators. Small quantity generators and large quantity generators are required to maintain emergency equipment on site. The type of emergency equipment is going to vary based on your facility. but the common ones include fire extinguishers, alarm or communication systems, spill kits, personal protective equipment, and decontamination equipment. The testing frequency is also going to vary and is typically based on manufacturer's recommendation and common sense, especially when it comes to spill kits. Some may be used more frequently than others. So you'll want to inspect them at appropriate intervals to ensure that you have adequate and functional supplies. As part of emergency preparedness, it's necessary to maintain adequate aisle space. Having aisle space to be able to read the labels is great, but the important thing is the space is required so that personnel and equipment can get in and respond to a release or a fire. Small quantity generators and large quantity generators are also required to make arrangements with local emergency authorities and keep documentation that arrangements have been made, or document the failed attempts to make arrangements. The purpose of working with local responders is to help them be familiar with your facility so they know the layout, the properties of the hazardous waste on site, where people are likely to be working, and possible evacuation routes. All of these details are necessary if they ever need to respond to an emergency. If you are a small quantity generator, you must have at least one employee on the premises or on call who can respond to all emergencies at the facility. That person should know that to call the fire department if there is a fire or attempt to extinguish a fire using a fire extinguisher, to contain and clean up spills as soon as practical, and if you have a fire, explosion, or other release that could threaten people outside of your facility, or if the spill has reached surface water, then you must immediately notify the National Response Center at 1-800-424-8802. When posting information, include the name and emergency telephone number of the emergency coordinator, the location of fire extinguishers and spill control material, and if present, the fire alarm, and the telephone number for the fire department unless the facility has a direct alarm. If you are a large quantity generator, you must prepare and maintain a written contingency plan. The plan must be designed to minimize hazards to human health or the environment from fires, explosions, or any unplanned sudden or non-sudden releases of hazardous waste. And the plan needs to be implemented immediately in those cases. In addition, a large quantity generator must maintain all reports of contingency plan implementation on file and report these incidents to the Director of Ohio EPA. A copy of your contingency plan and revisions must be maintained at your facility and submitted to all local police, fire departments, hospitals, and emergency response teams. Here's a link to our generator handbook, and in Appendix 3, there is a sample contingency plan for your reference. The items that are required to be included in the contingency plan are outlined in Rule 52-61. The plan needs to specify the actions that need to be taken when responding to fires, explosions, or releases of hazardous waste. It needs to describe the arrangements with the local emergency responders and have a list of names and telephone numbers of all emergency coordinators. The plan needs to list all emergency equipment and include details such as their location, description, and explanation of capabilities. And finally, the contingency plan needs to include an evacuation plan, where there is a possibility that an evacuation might be needed. The evacuation plan needs to include details such as the signals used to begin evacuation, evacuation routes, and alternative evacuation routes in cases where a primary route could become blocked or by a release of hazardous waste or a fire. Along with the contingency plan, large quantity generators are required to have a quick reference guide to provide easy access for emergency responders to the most critical information when responding to an emergency. New facilities need to submit this quick reference guide when they are submitting their plan. But large quantity generators that were registered prior to October 5th, 2020 only need to submit the quick reference guide when they submit a revised plan for other necessary revisions. The quick reference guide consists of 8 elements. It needs to list the types of hazardous waste and their associated hazards, the estimated maximum amount of each hazardous waste on site, and specify if there are any hazardous waste that require unique or special treatment, such as things that may react violently with water, because that's something the fire department would want to know about. Or if you have something like hydrofluoric acid, that will dictate the type of PPE someone wears and how medical professionals will treat anyone that's exposed to it. The quick reference guide needs to include a map of the facility that shows where hazardous waste is located, and there needs to be a street map that shows the surrounding businesses, residents, and schools. The location of the water supply needs to be identified, any information about on-site notification systems to communicate with facility personnel, and the name and number of the person designated as the emergency coordinator. Now let's cover large quantity generator closure notification requirements. When an LQG closes either an accumulation area or the entire facility, a notification is required. When closing an accumulation unit, including the central accumulation area, they need to either place a notice in the operating record within 30 days of closing it, or they can notify the Ohio EPA within 90 days that the closure performance standards have been met. If the entire facility is closing, you will need to notify the Ohio EPA 30 days prior to closing and then again 90 days after closing to confirm the closure performance standards have been met. If more than 90 days is needed to meet the closure performance standards, an extension can be requested, but keep in mind you would need to request it no later than 75 days after closing the facility. You can't wait until the last possible moment to ask for an extension. And just to clarify, closure is not needed for satellite accumulation areas. There are specific hazardous waste training requirements for small quantity generators and large quantity generators. Small quantity generators must ensure that all employees are thoroughly familiar with proper waste handling and emergency procedures relevant to their responsibilities during normal facility operation and emergency situations. This is a performance-based training standard. Large quantity generators must conduct classroom instruction or on-the-job training and maintain documentation. Large quantity generators have more in-depth training requirements. Personnel involved with hazardous waste management should have training in proper waste handling and emergency procedures appropriate to the types of waste managed. Generally, employees need to be familiar with the types of emergency equipment on site, the communication systems, and how to implement the contingency plan. Specific information that needs to be maintained includes the job title and written job description for each position related to hazardous waste management, and the name of the employee filling that position. Facility personnel need to complete an initial training program within 6 months of being hired and participate in annual refreshers. There needs to be a written description of the type and amount of training that will be given to each job position. There also needs to be some form of record kept to document the training. For example, a copy of the training sign-in sheet would be acceptable. Personnel training records on current employees need to be kept until the closure of the facility. Personnel training records for former employees need to be kept for at least 3 years from the date the employee last worked at the facility. Now we are going to go over a few reporting requirements. An exception report is another element of the manifest tracking system. This report lets the Ohio EPA know that you didn't receive a signed manifest back in the appropriate time frame. Small quantity generators needs to submit this report if a signed manifest isn't received within 60 days. And large quantity generators need to contact the transporter and/or TSDF to determine the status of their waste if a signed manifest isn't received within 35 days. If it's still not received within 45 days, a report needs to be submitted. Let's move on to biennial reports. You are required to file a biennial report if your business reached large quantity generator status at any time in an odd numbered year. Biennial reports must be received by Ohio EPA's Division of Environmental Response and Revitalization by March 1st of every even numbered year. Again, if you are a large quantity generator and have not submitted your report yet, you should do so as soon as possible. Information included in this report is based on the previous calendar year's waste generation. You should report only the hazardous waste that counted towards the determination of your generator status. This includes waste that are generated, accumulated, and subsequently managed on-site or shipped off-site. And now, record-keeping requirements. While very small quantity generators don't have many requirements, they are still required to demonstrate proper waste evaluation and disposal. Small quantity generators and large quantity generators need to keep records of test results, analysis, or other documents related to their hazardous waste determinations. These records need to be retained for at least 3 years after the waste was last sent to on-site or off-site treatment, storage, or disposal. In addition to the waste determination records, small quantity generators and large quantity generators need to maintain copies of signed manifests, LDRs, and biennial reports for 3 years. Small quantity generators and large quantity generators managing hazardous waste in tanks are required to keep inventory logs to demonstrate tanks have been emptied in the required time frame. In addition, large quantity generators need to maintain their employee training records, contingency plan, and closure notifications. I've linked a requirement summary table to this slide. It's a helpful and comprehensive overview of the roles. It breaks down the various management requirements and lists whether very small quantity generators, small quantity generators, or large quantity generators must comply with them. And it also links back to the rule citations. As part of the generator improvements rule that were adopted in October 2020, episodic generation provisions were created to allow more flexibility for very small quantity generators and small quantity generators who have episodic events. An episodic event is an activity that does not normally occur that causes a generator to exceed the calendar month quantity limits for hazardous waste generation. Under these provisions, you are allowed 2 episodic events per year without changing your generator category, but you can only have 1 planned and 1 unplanned event, and you need to submit a petition for the second event. The linked fact sheet contains information on the management, record keeping, and notification requirements for episodic generators. When you are preparing for an episodic event, you need to notify Ohio EPA at least 30 days prior to submitting Form 9029 and the episodic generator addendum. Both of those forms are located on the linked webpage. For an unplanned event, you need to notify Ohio EPA within 72 hours by phone, email, or fax, and follow it up with the required forms. If you don't qualify for the provisions, you need to manage your hazardous waste under the applicable generator requirements for whatever category you have bumped up into. And if you are a large quantity generator in an odd-numbered year, you would need to submit a biannual report in the following even-numbered year, like 2022. Now I'm going to highlight the violations that Ohio inspectors cite the most. Throughout years of hazardous waste inspections, inspectors have identified the #1 violation as failure to properly evaluate waste, over twice as much as any other violation. Other common violations include improper labeling and management of containers, not conducting weekly inspections, not testing or maintaining emergency equipment, not filing biannual reports correctly. Since it's the most common violation, I really do want to drive home that it's very important to not overlook waste streams. Don't put any waste into the trash before you confirm that it is not hazardous. This is something that should be communicated to all employees who could possibly dispose of wastes. To avoid container management violations, the simplest thing you can do as a business is to communicate to employees how hazardous waste containers should be managed, so that everyone is aware to keep containers closed and handle them in a manner to prevent damage or possible leaks. Because it only takes one person to make a mistake and leave the drum open, that could result in a cited violation. It's also a good idea to have a backup person or maybe multiple backup people to conduct the weekly inspections. Someone may be out sick or on vacation on the day that inspections normally take place, so having that system in place could prevent a gap in the inspection records. To avoid emergency equipment violations, you will want to make sure that you are inspecting your alarm systems, fire protection equipment, spill kits, and decontamination equipment at the appropriate intervals, and also documenting those inspections. Something you could consider for your spill kits is to use tamper seal tape, so you can easily tell if someone has opened the kit. To avoid biennial report violations identified during an inspection, you will want to make sure you submit the reports by the March 1st deadline in even-numbered years. Once again, if you have not yet submitted a report, please do so. To make sure that your report is accurate, keep in mind that you should only include your hazardous waste streams. So no universal waste or used oil should be on it. And you should always double check it for accuracy before submitting. The next few slides have some links to useful resources that I felt might be helpful. So we'll have them in the downloadable content. You can check out those web pages. If you do have questions, please reach out to us. You can search our knowledge articles in the Customer Support Center and submit questions there. Or you can reach out to speak with my section directly during the week or during this presentation right now. And you can also take advantage of OCAT's confidential compliance assistance hotline and chat service.
Okay, thank you so much, Bill, for your great presentation. And thank you, Tammy and Christy, for helping address submitted questions. We had a lot of questions coming in. We unfortunately don't have time for more questions. We'd also like to bring to your attention our Encouraging Environmental Excellence Award Program, which recognizes entities for exceptional achievements in environmental stewardship. Please go to our website at the link on the slide to learn more about this program. And please join us for some more webinar sessions today as part of BWC's Ohio Safety Congress. We have a air pollution permit requirements session from 1 to 2 and what to expect during an EPA inspection from 3 to 4. And then on April 5th, we have a webinar on our water resource restoration sponsorship program. This program uses interest monies from our Water Pollution Control Loan Fund loan sponsorship projects to fund preservation and restoration of aquatic habitat. And if you missed past webinars or want to register for upcoming webinars, please check out that link. Our events calendar is on every single web page at the bottom in the footer. If you click on there, you can register for upcoming events. You can also go to our DEFA webpage, which that link is on the screen there. You can also, when you get to the DEFA webpage, go to the left-hand column, click on training, and that will take you to future training and also recordings of past trainings. We also archive all of our trainings on our YouTube channel. So if you go to the agency YouTube channel, you can view the recording. This will be up in approximately a week from the webinar. And we also include a link to the PDF copy of the PowerPoint slides with the recording. And to receive notifications of upcoming webinars, go to our Ohio EPA Customer Support Center, and that link is also on the slide. The Customer Support Center link is also on the footer of each of our web pages. With that, we'll end today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day.